Thank you again, Joseph. So this month of July, we celebrate our religious freedom with these unity principles and how to use these principles to live freely, free from the chains that bind us. So in my world, I need a faith that I can examine, a faith that I can question, that I can pick and probe and poke and see what happens. I need a faith that I can dig deeply into with my doubt, with my questioning, with my fear. I need a faith that'll carry me through all of that and see where I end up on the other side of all of that probing and questioning. And as I dig deeply, I might find places that I don't really come to answers that satisfy my curious mind, my ego, and yet I can sit and I can be still and I can continue to not understand, and I can be willing to accept that faith for now and just trust. In her book, The Five Principles, Unity Minister Reverend Ellen Davenport suggests that we examine our ideas from time to time, our ideas of God, to allow our concepts to expand and grow and change just as our spiritual maturity evolves. We had the class this morning, and admittedly none of us have the same image, an idea, and concepts of God today that we had when we were 7, or perhaps even 20, or perhaps even yesterday. So we'll practice this religious freedom and take a deep dive into the unity principles and see what comes on the other side. And first I want to say that there are many faith traditions and spiritual practices that call into life these principles. They're not exclusive to unity. They're not even unique to unity. So principles are laws of the universe that never change. They're ideas that over time have been proven to be consistent and unchanging. And we don't have to believe those spiritual laws. It's okay. Principles work whether we know them, whether we understand them, or whether we believe them. Principles work regardless of my thought, or as we'll see in a couple of weeks, principles work with our thoughts. Just as the scientific law of gravity, we don't have to believe in gravity, we don't have to understand it or even acknowledge it, but yep, here we are. If I jump off the step, I go down. If I hold the book, it falls to the floor. So it doesn't matter if we agree with it or not. That's the nature of laws. So principle 1, God is absolute good and present everywhere. So let's start with that idea of God. We had some fun with that this morning. And if you're so inclined, join that book study. It's fabulous. So John Shelby Spong says, God is not a being whom we can relate. Rather, God is being itself. God is not a noun that needs to be defined. God is a verb that needs to be lived. God is a verb that needs to be lived. In Islam, there's a word, tanzih, which means God that is beyond any similarity to anything. God is the ultimate unknown, the ultimate unknowable, the great beyond, which we cannot comprehend. That seems to sum it up pretty well for me. For me, God is the energy of the universe, that energy that moves in everything and through everything and around everything, that energy that transcends all that I can see, hear, all that I can touch, feel, and imagine. However expansive of my idea of that divine energy is, I never can come close to touching the edges of it. That's the transcendent nature of God. It can be frustrating for us as humans to comprehend that, to sit with that, because we have to be able to define everything. We want to be able to define it in words that we understand. But that would be making God in our image rather than us in God's image. So we sit with that expansiveness. Just let yourself flow to as far as you can go and know that you're not close. And there are many names that we have for that all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere presence. We call that the divine, spirit, universal love, the one. Presence, great spirit. What name do you have for that presence and power that moves in your life? Call it out. And it's okay to call it God. Father.
The all.
The all.
Creator.
Source. Oh, beautiful, yes. All of those names are intimate and meaningful for us. And just between us, I don't think that essence and energy really minds what we call it, just so we connect with it. Just so we have a relationship with that. This is the absolute good that's present everywhere. God is all good, present everywhere. All good, present everywhere. Now, I can see the divinity in the universe. I see God by whatever name you use all around me. I see it when I sit in the backyard at my home. I see it when I walk my labyrinth. I see it when I sit with my four-legged family. When I'm with my children, my grandchildren. Oh, let me tell you about my grandchildren. I can see God in the eyes and face of my 8-year-old grandson. I can feel the presence of God in him. I can see the face of God in all of you. When I look around, I can see it. I can feel it pour from you. So what about those places and experiences that vision of God, that presence of the divine, isn't quite so clear to me? It's difficult at best to see the divine in those experiences of violence and hatred one for another. It makes me shake. In those experiences of abuse and disrespect one against another or against nature, I have a hard time seeing God in that. And that these are the opportunities that allow me to step into translational or transformational approach to life. So if I look at a translational approach to life, I will be with an experience and I will use ideology, words to conform what I'm experienced to God being good. I might say things like, oh, it's all good because it's all God. Or I might say, it's all good by itself. I might say, oh, it's divine order, so it has to be good. And I take what happens and I use language to create an image of good. Now that might work for a little while. Then it begins to feel incomplete to look at the news and say, oh, it's divine order. Or it's all God, it's all good. To look at the news and say that. It begins to feel kind of flippant. Because the truth is that even if I use those words and say those phrases, my eyes and my heart can't see and feel the good in every experience. If I take a look at the hurts in life, I can say truthfully, yes, it's all God. Yes, because it is all God, it is all good. And yes, I believe divine order is always moving in our world. And yet I skip a very significant piece of the experience by just applying words to it. So I move into a transformational view of these experiences, and I sit with that hurt, that anger, whatever it is that's moving in me, triggered by the world that I see. I delve into the significance of those feelings. What do they mean? I explore what's missing for me in that experience that I'm seeing played out in the news or in my neighborhood or at the grocery store. What's missing for me? Perhaps I feel inadequate. Perhaps I feel neglected. Perhaps I feel unloved. Perhaps I feel abandoned. And I begin to see that what I'm looking for, I'm looking into the human world to love me, to validate me, and to tend to me. And you may have figured out that the world is not capable of that. The world cannot do that for us. The world cannot be that for us. So with that awareness of what is missing, I'm guided to truth. And that's truth with a capital T, the truth that never changes, that principle, that law of spirit. And so I look differently at my value, and I look differently at love. It comes from a source far greater than the human experience. It comes from my deep relationship with divine spirit, God. Through this transformational approach, I reach a deep inner peace. I reach wholeness and completeness. So rather than finding myself in the outer world, I find myself from my inner realm. And then, when I find myself and my wholeness, my completeness, my worthiness, my love, I'm now poised to carry peace and harmony, love and truth into the world rather than calling the world to be these things for me. I transform myself. And then I transform my world. So God is absolute good and present everywhere. That energy that moves through the universe, that which is endless and boundless beyond our human comprehension or imagination. It's the presence that's also as intimate and close as our breath. So by whatever name you call it, there is nothing that is outside of this infinite substance. Nothing. You will never look into the eyes of a person that is not part of the same source that we are. never see a creature that walks the earth or flies the sky or swims the sea, any trees, any part of this vast earth. It is all part of that same substance. All of it. Nothing is left out in that realm of spirit and truth. So Scripture tells us this story about Joseph and his brothers. You may remember it. And in the end, Joseph is able to forgive his brothers for their mistreatment of him, realizing that what they meant for evil, God meant for good, because we remember that wonderful things happened to Joseph. And he was able to save his brothers and his father. So what on earth could God have meant for good in the mass shootings in Uvalde, Texas, in Buffalo, New York, in Parkland, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Charleston, South Carolina, and all the places in between? What on earth could God have meant for good in the suppression and oppression of people within the borders of our very own country because their skin is a different shade of beautiful? Because their faith is radically different than ours. Because they identify as a transgender person. Because they are gay or lesbian or bisexual. Or because choices they make about their reproduction. What good does God have in that? So if I begin to feel discouraged, and some of you may feel that way too, I've always believed that our feelings come for a purpose. And I feel that they come for a purpose of good. They come to alert us. Did you ever have the feeling that something was dangerous? That feeling inside you? Then you can leave. They come to inform us. They come to stir us into thinking. They come to grow us emotionally, spiritually. And we don't need to sit in every feeling forever. We can explore it. We can let it share a gift with us. And then we can move along. We can use what we learn from being with that feeling. So when I feel discouraged, I recall the many times in Scripture when we are invited to release and let go. Psalms 55:22. When we are invited to cast our burdens on the Lord, and you will be sustained. And then in Jeremiah we hear, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to give you hope and a future, and not to do harm." Remember always that in these scriptures the Lord is our highest consciousness, our I am, our divine consciousness. So where do we cast our burden? We cast our burden to our highest thinking. We move from this human realm of ego and needing to be right and life must and should be this, and we move to our highest I am, Christ consciousness. And in 2 Corinthians 5:7 reminds us that we walk by faith, not by sight. We walk by faith. And then I'm compelled to remember that I have to practice what I teach. I have to practice what I say I believe. We all need to walk our talk, right? So we sit with those feelings, and I'm compelled to search for the good. At first, that's really difficult when I feel disappointed because life's not going my way, the world is not moving the direction I think it should. I feel that disappointment, and I might not exactly be able to find good. And then I hear the words, "But wait a minute, Karen. You said that you believe that God is absolute good and present in everything. So I must look again. and I must look differently. Perhaps I look at this side, or I look at from the front, or from the back, or from the over or under. I look at every aspect. I look to see what disturbs my ability to see good. And I have this fun tool. This is a kaleidoscope. And every time I pick up this kaleidoscope and look through it, I give it a turn. And I get a different view. And guess what? When I turn that kaleidoscope back, I can never go back to exactly the original view. It always changes. It always looks different with each turn of the kaleidoscope. So we soften our view and our perspective of life. And we soften our expectations. We go back, all the way back to Genesis, where we're reminded of that story of Joseph and his brothers. Now Jacob, the father, admittedly loved his son Joseph a little bit more than the brothers. And as teenagers, the brother had had enough. And so they took Joseph and left him to his own devices. Well, it's a long story, and we'll share it on another day. But in the end, Joseph was able to forgive his brothers. And it was through his spiritual wisdom that he was able to declare what we heard before, that you meant this for bad, but God meant it for good. So we use this experience, just as Joseph did. He used his experience to form something good. How many times do people have horrendous experiences in life and create something good? Many of our nonprofit organizations are inspired because someone had a tragic experience. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, many of our social nonprofit organizations come inspired by a horrible experience to create something good. Any of us, can create something beautiful out of the messiness of our life. When we change our perspective, when we change our point of view, when we give up what we're holding so tightly to of what must be, and we let it go, we make space for what might be and what can come. And we begin to broaden our view to look with the eyes of God and see good until good exists. And this is the definition of the power of love. It's the power of God, looking until good is what exists. And it's a mighty big and, to see with the eyes of God requires us to relinquish our egoic vision of what life must be like. I heard it said once, if life were supposed to be any different, it would be. So if this life that we're experiencing right now was supposed to be different, it would be. And yet we have within us the power and the ability to shift and guide and direct our lives how we choose. So we can stand in the muck and the mire of life and all that's calling us, and we can call on our spiritual discernment. And we can ask, is this experience drawing us into any action? Probably. What are we supposed to do? What action are we supposed to take? So seeing with the eyes of God does not really mean to me saying, oh, it's all God, so it's all good. It is that realm of absolute, unchangeable, undeniable truth. It's the spiritual law of truth. And in this realm of human existence, we have what we call free will. And we misuse that free will, right? We can look around and we can see what happens with the misuse of free will. Suffering is our own misuse of free will. So in that realm of our human, we do awful things to one another. And yet we don't sit idly by and just allow atrocities to happen, to allow oppression to happen. And I turn to Matthew 25:35 to 40. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. These are the things that we do, move into action, to be that presence, God the good, omnipotent, to be that one power and one presence in our own lives and in our world. So God is absolute good and present everywhere. We get to work with that this week. We get to work with that every time we turn on the news, every time we read a newspaper, every time we have an encounter with another. God is absolute good and present in it all. So how will we change our view? How will we change how we present in that experience if we say that we believe that? Can we say that principle, God is absolute good, present everywhere? Can we speak that out loud together? God is absolute good, present everywhere.